Good morning, or evening, or afternoon, whatever. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. Unless you're in like Australia, in which case, happy Thursday. Anyway, Decastro's filed a couple more motions in his Oklahoma criminal case. One is to disqualify the judge. His basic grounds for that is that she, up until like 2023, was a prosecutor and she only became a judge in 2023. And so somehow in Chili's mind, that is the appearance of impartiality. I mean, imagine if it was that easy to disqualify a judge because the judge was a former prosecutor. Imagine like every criminal defense attorney ever would move to disqualify the judge, but they don't. So I mean, there's your sign. It's kind of stupid and silly, in my opinion, that he's moving to disqualify the judge before the judge has even heard any motions. That's kind of stupid and silly. But I mean, it's Chili Decastro, so who knows? In addition, he filed another motion to disqualify the prosecutor. His arguments for that are spurious at best. You filed under two case numbers. Well, I mean, that could be a clerk's error as well. Some of them, initially it was ending in 29, but then it got changed to 30. That's probably a clerk issue. That's probably like, we have two 29s, or there was some filing issue with 29, so the clerk changed it to 30. So that's probably a clerical issue. The other issue is that on the indictment, that's the charging document. It's like the complaint in a civil case or a petition in a petition case. It's where the prosecutor lays out the charges, and the prosecutor has to sign it. And when he's signing it that to the best of his information that these are true and correct. Now, he doesn't have firsthand knowledge. The prosecutor isn't the recipient witness. The prosecutor isn't the person who saw it. And Chili's argument is that, well, how do we even know that the prosecutor did an independent investigation of all this stuff? Well, he doesn't have to. I don't know. First of all, that's a question. You don't put questions into your motions. That's a Chili Decastro / pro-purism that doesn't make any sense. You make statements of fact, and then you make statements of law. Then you apply the facts to the law. You don't ask questions. A motion isn't asking questions other than will the court grant the relief I'm requesting or not. That's the only question you're asking in a motion. So if your motion contains a question other than, I'm asking the court to grant this relief, then your motion is already terrible and stupid. That's just a basic rule. But anyway, what the prosecutor signed was that he's reviewed the probable cause affidavit, which was signed by a judge, so a judge found there to be probable cause. And based on the information that he has, considering that he is not a percipient witness, he doesn't have firsthand information, he only has the affidavit, that there's probable cause for those things. Because remember, not only do you need probable cause for an arrest, but the prosecutor has a duty to review the information and determine for himself that there's probable cause. The prosecutor probably should also think, well, am I likely to succeed at trial? Do I think I can prove this beyond a reasonable doubt, or else why would he bring the case? But at a minimum, as far as due process is concerned and all that fun stuff, the prosecutor has to have probable cause. Now, it's almost certain the prosecutor has probable cause, because there's a probable cause affidavit that was signed by a judge saying that, yes, I find there to be probable cause. But there are instances where other facts come out after the probable cause affidavit is signed by the judge, where it might throw enough doubt in there that the prosecutor might not think that there's still probable cause. Now, in my experience in California, in the counties where I've had criminal cases, or I've worked on criminal cases in those counties, the district attorney has an investigative unit. They're not retired police and sheriff, but they're former police and sheriff who've been recruited out of the police departments and sheriff's departments to work as, they're still law enforcement, but they're investigators for the DA. And it's their role to go around, and if there is more information that the DA needs to prosecute, it's their job to go out there and interview witnesses, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know everything they do. I've never been one, and I have had limited interactions with them. My neighbor, by the way, what is a former sheriff's deputy, and now he is an investigator for the DA. So I have some knowledge of it, but again, I don't, when I talk shop with him, I'm normally not talking about what his specific roles are. But it's not the prosecutor's job to go out and investigate. It's the prosecutor's job to look at the documents that he has, look at the evidence that he has, and make a determination based on that evidence, which would be on information and belief, since he's not a percipient witness, that there is still probable cause. And he did that, and that's fine. And the weird thing is that Chili isn't actually arguing that any of the facts presented in the probable cause affidavit are wrong. He's saying that I have a different legal interpretation of the law, and so I think that the facts that we all agree on don't arise to a crime, which is entirely different than saying that the facts are wrong. So those are two motions that are almost certainly going to be denied. Now, again, the judge has some discretion on whether or not she's going to allow herself to be recused. And she may recuse herself. I think it's a female judge. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, it's California. Maybe I should ask the judge's pronouns first, but I'm just going to assume that the judge uses female pronouns because I believe it's a female judge. Chili refers to her as a female, so I'm going to suggest that she's a female judge. So she can say, you know what, I just don't want to deal with this. I don't want to risk getting overturned on appeal, no matter how slight the chances are. And so why not? I'll just recuse myself. That could happen. Not likely, but it could happen. I mean, we've seen attempts. If you remember back to Lane Myers, he tried to get judges recused, and he was fairly unsuccessful with that. So, and he had just as bad grounds as Chili does. I mean, it really takes, again, and I've explained this in the Lane Myers, it really takes a judge having some like personal connection with, like, taking, I'm dating the prosecutor. Something like that. Something like that would have to be taking place. Something along those lines would have to be taking place before you can argue that the judge is biased. And actually win, right? So, very low chances of success. Now, I was pondering on the way in here to work, like, what would I do if I was the prosecutor? Because I'm going to assume that the prosecutor knows that Chili's not a resident of, or really in any way affiliated with, the state of Oklahoma. So I would have, as the prosecutor, I would have had my investigative department do background on Chili. And I think I would have uncovered, through their various, National Crime Information System, something like that. I think that they would have discovered the outstanding warrants for failing to appear in Ohio. Based on that, what I would do if I was a prosecutor, and I'm not, and I never plan on being a prosecutor, it's not my cup of tea, I would ask the court, I'd motion the court to consolidate all of Chili's motions into the same hearing as the arraignment. And I would ask the court to require an in-person appearance by Decastro. That means that if he wants to do his motions, if he wants his motions heard, he has to show up. And then at the arraignment, if I was the prosecutor, I would ask for as large of a bail amount as possible. So that if Chili wants to get a bond, he has to spend a lot of money. And if Chili does bond out and absconds back to California or Nevada or wherever the heck his state of residence is currently, wherever his couch of residence is, the bounty hunter would have a large incentive to get him and bring him back to Oklahoma to face prosecution. That's what I would do. But, not my monkey, not my zoo. So on other, let's just say, responding to comments on my last video, the first question was, who would I pick as king? And I'm going to tell you that I'm not smart enough to do that. But I also know that kings, like dictators are essentially kings in everything but name, pick themselves. They are distinguished by their peers as having more intellect and more charisma. They gather to themselves sufficient power to take control. And then they exercise that power to make themselves the ruler of the country. That's how kings are typically selected, and I don't particularly have a problem with that. My goal, my hope, is that any king that we have, if we ever do get to the point where we have a king, would have sufficient ties to the U.S., a sufficient inherent mutual like a purpose where what the king will benefit the king would benefit the country. And so, that's kind of my hope. But, you get bad kings and you get good kings, and you hope you get more good kings than bad kings. Bad kings are inevitable. But you always have a bad Congress. You always have a bad bureaucracy behind the scenes. You always have bad presidents, because remember, you get really two choices for president. You get the one presented by the Republicans and the one presented by the Democrats. So you have a choice between a turd sandwich and a shit burger. Like, it's really no difference. And the same thing in like Senate elections and Congress elections. Like, you get your choice between two equally terrible candidates. 9 times out of 10, maybe there's some independent running, but good luck to them, right? Very few independents get into Congress. So you always have a bad republic, and that's pretty much what most Western countries are, is some form of a republic where you have where the people elect the representatives, the ministers or whatever, to go in and write the laws, etc. And universally, there's no one likes the ruling people. Universally, people can have a good king and love the good king. They can have a bad king and hate the bad king, but they always hate the legislative and executive branches. Always. I mean, a good figure is like 50 some odd percent, but everybody says Putin is a dictator, and he has like 80% approval rating in Russia. Last time I heard. I mean, it might have gone up or down since then, but we don't get that with our presidents, and our Congress is typically somewhere in the like 10 to 20% approval rating. And the problem is there's no accountability. That's like, you get the Republicans in there and they'll say, the Democrats are preventing us from passing all the good stuff that the people actually voted for us to do. You get the Democrats in there, the Republicans are preventing us from doing it. There's no accountability. And like right now, we have a Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican President, a Republican majority Supreme Court, and we're not getting anything done. I mean, everything that Trump's doing is through executive order, and the few bills that we have had go through are not well liked by the American people as a whole. You might like them, but generally speaking, like the Big Beautiful Bill, like, it's terrible. It's terrible. Like, who liked the Big Beautiful Bill? No one. No one except for Congress, who's getting paid off. I mean, by condensing power to a relatively small group of people, it's so much easier for large corporate interests to buy what they want out of these people than it is to have to bribe everybody. But even then, it's relatively easy to bribe everybody. People are really susceptible to propaganda. Another dumb question statement was that peasants in the medieval era, they were dirt poor and they had terrible lives. Well, I mean, compared to what? First of all, the dumb assumption is that if we get a king, we're going to revert back to medieval peasantry. And like, why are you making that assumption? But in addition, it's like factually incorrect. Peasants worked fewer hours throughout the year than your average 40-hour-a-week wage slave does. And God help you if you're an idiot like me and you work for 3 law firms and you have your own practice. I mean, 40-hour a week sounds pretty damn reasonable. So it's a stupid notion, but it's also factually incorrect. They worked less, they paid less taxes. You know? And the lords of that particular area had a vested interest in making sure that they had peasants and that those peasants had babies and those peasants could feed themselves. Because if they didn't, then the lords, I mean, it wasn't like this mass immigration thing back then. I mean, if you lose your peasants, like, you're fucked. You know, it's not like somebody else is going to give you their peasants to work your land. So the lords had a vested interest in making sure that their peasants were able to survive and make babies and all that fun stuff. We don't have that today. If your boss is done with you, if he thinks you're not working, putting in enough unpaid overtime, boom, you're fired, and he'll import some H-1B visa guy to take your place. He has no vested interest in you and in your well-being and making sure that you can have a family because your children are going to come and work for him. That's gone. But it's a stupid idea to think that we're going to go back to medieval peasantry. And the last thing I want to touch on is someone said, well, okay, if your goal is families and everything that benefits families you're in favor of and everything that hurts families you're against, what about guns? Most kids under the age of 18 are killed with guns. It's the number one cause of death for kids under the age of 18. Well, the last time I looked into this was maybe a year or two ago, maybe 3 years ago now. I don't remember. But the last time I looked, first of all, those stats aren't exactly correct. First of all, it's kids between the ages of 1 and 19 that those stats cover. That's the first thing. And you're like, well, why is it between 1 and 19? Because kids under 1 die a lot from a lot of different things. And it's not good for this particular stat if we include kids under the age of 1. There's your first clue. And why do we go up to 19? Because if you drop it down to 18, it becomes about a 50-50. It's a wobbler year over year. More kids die in car accidents than with firearms. So we need that 19 to really cement in that kids die mostly from firearms. So it's a bit of a wonky stat. Also, it includes not just accidents, but it includes homicides and it includes suicides. Well, homicides are already illegal, so there's that. So, you get a year where you get some gangbangers, some 19-year-old gangbangers killing each other out in the streets, and all of a sudden your stats go way up. You get a year where they decide to show off by doing races around city streets, and they die in car accidents more. Well, But it's those 19-year-olds that really throw it off. 18, it becomes a wobbler. 17, it's cars. So do you want to ban cars? No, you don't. Because you see the utility in them, but you don't see the utility in guns. Some other things that aren't considered in these stats are how many deaths are prevented by guns every year. And that's a stat we don't know. We know how many lawful self-defenses there are, close to anyway, but we don't know how many times an incident has been discouraged by a homeowner racking a shotgun behind a closed door, or even pointing a gun at someone and having that discourage them from the crime that they were going to attempt to commit. There's a lot of that, and most of it is unreported, or at least it doesn't make it into the statistics. There's no statistics on that. I mean, I've seen guesses, estimates that have been done, based on limited data, but we don't know. So what is the cost benefit of firearms as related to children? And also I want to remind you that while each death is terrible, I think between 1 and 18, it's about 2,500 deaths a year, 2,500 child deaths a year, which isn't a huge statistic. I mean, it's something that we can absorb. If you compare that to, let's say, abortion, I mean, if you want kids to survive, obviously you want to get rid of abortion, right? How many kids would it save every year if we just straight outlawed abortion? Now, I know the argument you're going to get. Well, if you don't give legal abortions, then there will be illegal abortions. Well, if you ban guns, we can't keep right now on our southern border, definitely, and probably on our northern border as well. Guns go out of the U.S. into Mexico, and drugs come in from Mexico into the U.S. We have a porous border. What would stop it from guns coming into the U.S.? I mean, they could already go down to Mexico from the U.S., and drugs already come in from Mexico into the U.S. What's going to stop guns from coming from Mexico to the U.S.? Nothing? Okay, thanks. But in addition, I have personal reasons why I think that guns should not be outlawed. First of all, I'm going to say about 25 years ago, late 90s, early 2000s, I was the victim of a home invasion. I had a roommate at the time. We were both in our rooms. I was probably playing a video game. I don't really remember. We hear a commotion out in the front of the apartment. I come out with a pistol. My roommate comes out with an AK style, single, like semi-automatic, but it was an AK style rifle. And we're both in our doorways. And the front door's open, and there's some tweaker there, some meth head there. My phone was by the door. This is before cell phones, so I had to dial phone, and I'm calling the cops. And I'm, hold my pistol at him, get the fuck out, get the fuck out. Have a conversation with the 911 lady who, I'm dealing with something, but I give her the description of the guy and what's going on generally. And the dude's in the doorway, I don't know what it was going through his head. I don't know if he was armed. I don't know anything about it. I just know that there's some tweaker dude here standing in my doorway. And after what felt like forever, was probably only like a couple minutes, he maybe only a minute. I mean, it felt like forever, but he decides that he's going to leave. So I stay on the phone with the 911 gal until the cop shows up, 10 minutes later. And this is in Sacramento. This is in Natomas, to be specific. So it must have been a sheriff's deputy that showed up. And so what this cop does, instead of being like, oh, hey, I'm going to go find this tweaker, he takes our statements, he takes our firearms, he takes copies of our IDs, he takes our firearms to the station. I never hear anything back from this until a month later when I get a call from the sheriff's department saying, hey, you can come pick up your firearm. I go down there. They have fired my firearm was clean. I cleaned my firearms after I used them. My firearm was clean, and I got it back dirty. I got it back fired. So they spent that month, instead of chasing down this fucking meth head who came into my apartment, they spent that month investigating me. But that 10-minute delay, the cop didn't even show up with lights and sirens or anything like that. 10 minutes later, this dude comes sauntering up to the door hey, what's going on here? Give me your guns. I don't want any situations. And, first of all, taking our guns after we're in that situation, what if the dude returns? I mean, we had way more guns left in the apartment. We only gave him the guns that, that he knew of, the two guns that he knew of. So there was a lot more guns there. But what if he had taken all of our guns and this dude shows up again? There's me and my roommate. My roommate was, looked like a gorilla. He wasn't as tall as me, but he looked like a gorilla. At the time I was probably only 180, 190 pounds, but I'm, 6'2" and change. So, I'm not insignificant. My mouth has gotten me in plenty of fights. I can defend myself reasonably. I'm not saying that I'm a badass or anything like that, but I've been in more than one fist fight and held my own. So, but imagine if we didn't have firearms and he did. This tweaker did. I could be dead today. I could be dead today. And so, would the cops have saved me? No. And then fast forward to maybe, I don't remember how long ago it was. This is probably in 23, maybe 24. I don't know if my wife was pregnant at the time or if we already had our first child, but I was threatened by Earl Warden. He was going to show up at my door. Now, I want to remind you that Earl Warden, number one, flashed a lot of firearms on his channel. Number two, was a convicted rapist. Number three, had a conviction for felon with a firearm. And number four was, I don't remember at the time if he was facing, I think he was facing charges for child molestation. And this dude was threatening to show up at my door. Now, I live out in the country. My neighbor is obviously law enforcement, as I've told you, but like, is he going to be at home when this dude shows up? Am I going to call the sheriff and have them do like a 10, 15-minute response time to get out to me? Or am I going to defend my family? And I'm going to defend my family. And I was very clear on the steps that I would take to defend my family. And I even went so far as to talk to my neighbor, the law enforcement guy, who has a backhoe, and he said it's not an issue. You won't have any issues with this if this happens. So, I mean, firearms are a tool, just like any other tool. And any tool can be used for good or bad. And so, my position is that the benefits of firearms to my family, to my future generations, significantly outweigh the potential risks. Now, I do try to mitigate the risks. I keep most of my firearms locked up in a safe. So when I'm at home, they're all locked, or when I'm not at home, they're all locked up. I do have firearms that are quickly accessible to me when I'm at home, and I may or may not be carrying right now. I mean, you'd have to test me to find out, and I don't recommend it, but you know, and there's firearms in my office. I mean, I deal with divorce, and I deal with a lot of sketchy situations, civil harassment, restraining orders, and things like that. The last thing I want is some pissed off husband or ex-boyfriend or whatever showing up at my office because he can't get to whoever he wants to get to, and so he's going to get to me. So I take it very seriously. But in my estimation, and you can differ, reasonable minds can reasonably differ, but in my estimation, it is better for, and historically speaking, firearms have always been accessible to the American public. And there have been large periods throughout our history, pretty much prior to the sexual revolution, where people had, number one, most people got married, most people stayed married, and most people had relatively large families, 3, 4, 5 kids, etc. And it's only been fairly recently, the last 50-ish years, that that's changed, and firearms didn't do that. Firearms were not the mechanism that changed that. I would suggest to you that birth control has a much bigger impact on families and future generations. Abortion has a much bigger impact on families and future generation. At-will divorce has a much bigger impact on families and future generations. Any one of those, significantly bigger impact than firearms. So if you really want to get to the root cause of the problem, you get to the root cause of the problem. You don't do a short-sighted, well, you know, if we outlaw guns, this statistic will go down. What impact will that really have? And how much more of a negative? Have you really thought through what a negative impact that will also have? Will a different number go up? Anyway, that's all I got for you today. Sorry for being long-winded. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.